Coming up on the show today, we talk to a former Israeli negotiator about the situation in Rafah.
It seems like the Israeli government policy is to fight this war as if there are no hostages and to try to release the hostages if there is no war.
Plus, a plot to assassinate Volodymyr Zelenskyy.
2 colonels of the State Guard were found guilty of treason and aiding and abetting a terrorist attack aimed at eliminating a high-ranking Ukrainian officials.
And later, the U.S. has paused some arms shipments to Israel, and we visit a town in northern Libya that's still recovering from devastating floods. Today is Wednesday, May 8th, and this is VOA's Flashpoint, Global Crises. Good evening, I'm Steve Karish in Washington. The United States has been delaying shipments of weapons to Israel because of American opposition to Israel's actions in the southern Gaza city of Rafah. A senior administration official tells VOA that the U.S. has paused one shipment of weapons last week. It consists of 1,800 2,000-pound bombs and 1,700 500-pound bombs. The U.S. is especially focused on the end use of the 2,000-pound bombs and the impact they could have in the dense urban setting, as we have seen in other parts of Gaza. For its part, Israel acknowledges occasional disagreements with the U.S., but Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, an Israeli military spokesperson, says those disagreements are handled privately.
של ארצות הברית מתחילת המלחמה הוא בהיקף חסר תקדים לדעתי בהיסטוריה.
The military action in Rafah is controversial. Over 1 million civilians have taken refuge there, and Israel maintains that Hamas fighters and leadership are hiding there among the population. The U.S. has said it won't support military action there by Israel if there isn't a good plan for the civilians. Israel has also closed the border crossing with Egypt in Rafah, making it difficult for hospitals to get the supplies they need to care for the wounded and sick. Dr. Mohammed Zakwot is a Palestinian doctor. He says the situation is critical because of a lack of medicine and supplies, as well as fuel for generators.
The help of medical supplies and drugs also cannot reach, which is now in urgent need inside Rafah for the field hospitals and other hospitals, but now is completely closed. No one can reach there. Even the fuel, which is very important for the hospitals to run these hospitals now. We are in critical situation how to manage without fuel and without generators.
Israel maintains it is not targeting civilians or preventing humanitarian aid from reaching those who need it. So why did Israel close the border crossing? For some context, I spoke with Avi Melamed. He's a former Israeli intelligence officer, and he was a negotiator during the first and second Intifada. He says closing the border sends a message.
No, the Rafah Crossing is the major passage between Gaza and Egypt, and it's also the one of the major symbol of governance of Hamas in Gaza Strip. Since Hamas took over Gaza Strip in 2007, actually, now in course of time, of course, once Hamas established its control in Gaza, the whole crossing became a major income source for Hamas. The crossing has actually two parts. It has a pedestrian crossing for people of Gaza that are leaving Gaza to Egypt and coming back, and Hamas charges fees from every single person that is crossing. And also there is another passage which is a commercial one used for commodities. And so above other things, that passage also has been used, of course, for trafficking of weapons and other stuff coming into Gaza Strip from Egypt. So in that regard, taking control over the passage actually sends, first a symbolic message, if you wish, basically saying, this symbol of sovereignty is not in your hands anymore. And the second thing is actually basically signaling that now Israel has the ability to control what goes through and in the crossing itself.
So, looking at Rafah beyond the border crossing, taking a look at the military action going towards the whole city of Rafah, again, it's something that Israel is facing widespread condemnation for. What is Israel's justification for going into the city?
Look, according to the reports by the IDF, the remains of the structural power, military power of Hamas basically is located in Gaza. According to those reports, there are some estimated some 3-4 battalions of Hamas who actually are the remain of its major military structural power in the area of Rafah. This is one aspect. The other aspect is that according to the estimations, hostages are being held in this area, probably in tunnels in the area of Rafah, um, apparently used as a sort of like an insurance policy physically to leaders of Hamas that are apparently based there. And I think that currently the overwhelming approach, this in the intelligence in Israel, is that in Rafah, on this Gaza side in Rafah, the hostages are being held, or most of them, and leaders of Hamas. And so these are two major aspects. And then the other thing is that while being able to take control of the crossing and basically start to monitor the whole trafficking of the aid, humanitarian aid that is coming through the crossing, one of the challenges was that Hamas took over those trucks, and there has been reports and documentation of Hamas people taking over those trucks and starting to use those shipments for Hamas people, or generating a sort of like a black market industry in Gaza Street. So these are, roughly speaking, I would say the major, at least from an Israeli perspective, the major reasons for the focusing on Rafah.
My last question for you. You worked as a negotiator during the two intifadas several years ago. What would your advice be to the folks who are negotiating today?
Look, it's obviously very much in many different ways. It's very much different from situations back during the intifadas, particularly when you look at the whole story in the context of the hostages and the Israeli public opinion. In fact, there is no precedent, sort of speaking, of course, in context of negotiating such a situation. We did have back then the story of Gilad Shalit. We all remember that, but that was one Israeli soldier. Here we are looking at obviously a totally different story. I think that, and I've been saying it since day one of the war, and up until now, I think that has been the policy applied by the Israeli government. I said that it seems like the Israeli government policy is to fight this war as if there are no hostages, and to try to release the hostages if there is no war. And I think that up until now, this is, roughly speaking, continuing to be the guiding line, and I think that's the right guiding line, because there are many different layers and components into this story that has to be taken into calculation when you are, in the end of the day, trying to shape a policy and translate that policy into action on the ground, vis-a-vis the whole story of the Israeli hostages that are being held in Gaza Strip. So I would say that, if you'll ask me, I would say that the trajectory of putting the military pressure significantly and signaling very clearly that Israel is willing to move to the next phase of military pressure if there is no progress in the context of the story of the hostages, and simultaneously constantly initiating movement in the field of the hostages negotiation, including coming with another out-of-the-box thinking, suggestions, and so on. I think this is the right way to think. Would be, I think, if I was asked to navigate or to lead this challenge, that's the way I would address that.
That's Avi Melamed, former Israeli intelligence officer. Shifting gears now to the situation in Ukraine. Authorities have foiled an assassination plot against President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, and the Russian shelling of energy infrastructure facilities continues. VOA's Anna Chernikova has more from Kyiv.
2 colonels of the State Guard were found guilty of treason and aiding and abetting a terrorist attack aimed at eliminating a high-ranking Ukrainian officials. According to the Security Service of Ukraine, they planned to kill the President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, the head of the Security Service Vasyl Maluk, the head of the Intelligence Service Kyrylo Budanov, and other high-ranking officials. The Security Service of Ukraine reported that the Russian Special Service was behind the attack. One of the tasks of the Russian Federal Security Service agent network was to search for would-be traitors in the Ukrainian military, close to the protection of the president, who would take him hostage and later kill him. Their plans were exposed by the Security Service of Ukraine and the State Security Office. The suspects are now in custody and are facing life imprisonment. Meanwhile, in the early hours of Wednesday, the Russian forces launched a massive drone and missile attack across Ukraine, targeting mainly energy infrastructure. Ukrainian air defense claimed to have shot down 59 drones and missiles out of 76 launched. The Ministry of Energy confirmed the attack on energy facilities in 6 regions: Poltava, Kirovohrad, Zaporizhia, Lviv, Ivano-Frankivsk, and Vinnytsia. Critical energy infrastructure and residential buildings were damaged in those regions. Also, Russian troops attacked 3 thermal power plants, causing serious damage. The Ukrainian authorities have already warned the population that from 6 p.m. to 11 p.m. local time, power outages will be introduced throughout the country. Restrictions will evenly distributed across all regions.
Світ проспав. Відродження нацизму. О 5 ранку 24 лютого
Also, on Wednesday, President Zelenskyy addressed the nation in front of the foreign diplomatic corps and Ukrainian military to mark the anniversary of the end of the World War II. The president compared the Russia-Ukraine war to what the world experienced back in the 1940s, saying that Russian forces brought pages from World War II textbooks back into the global media spotlight and resurfaced Nazism with their actions in Ukraine. Zelenskyy expressed gratitude to everyone who defends and supports Ukraine in these difficult times. Anna Chernikova, VOA News, Kyiv.
You're listening to Flashpoint Global Crises from the Voice of America. I'm Steve Karish in Washington. The Hamas attack on Israel October 7th and the resulting war in Gaza has led to a dramatic increase in antisemitism worldwide, this according to a new report. In the U.S., the Biden administration has recommitted to the security of Israel and the safety of the Jewish community. Natasha Mozgovoya has the story.
This ancient hatred of Jews didn't begin with the Holocaust. It didn't end with the Holocaust either.
At the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum's annual remembrance ceremony at the U.S. Capitol, President Joe Biden had a message for American Jews and the State of Israel.
Let me reassure you, as your president, you're not alone. You belong. You always have and you always will. And my commitment to the safety of the Jewish people, the security of Israel, and its right to exist as an independent Jewish state is ironclad, even when we disagree.
The Antisemitism Worldwide Report for 2023, published Sunday by the Anti-Defamation League and Tel Aviv University, revealed a 103% increase over the previous year in acts of violence, vandalism, and harassment targeting American Jews. Speaking of the report's findings, Anti-Defamation League CEO Jonathan Greenblatt called it a global state of emergency affecting the Jewish people.
Unprecedented levels of anti-Semitism engulfed Jewish communities in capitals all over the planet. It was the worst year for anti-Jewish hate in America that we've ever seen since we started doing this work 45 years ago.
According to the report, nearly 3/4 of American university students have witnessed an anti-Semitic incident in some form since the beginning of the academic year. Many pro-Palestinian protesters, however, insist they are not anti-Semites. Zoe Reagan is a pro-Palestinian protester at the University of Washington in Seattle.
We have a lot of Jewish students amongst us, amongst the organizers here. This isn't about anti-Semitism. This is about being staunchly anti-Zionist, because there are people who are being displaced from their land and exterminated with U.S. taxpayer dollars.
Noah Tishby, co-author of the new book Uncomfortable Conversations with a Jew, says the term Zionism, which simply indicates Jews' right to their own home in the land of Israel, has been hijacked and demonized.
There's nothing wrong with criticizing Israeli government policies. That is not what is happening on campuses in America right now. They literally say resistance by all means necessary. They are praising October 7th. These people are calling to take down the single Jewish state in the world.
Tishby says while Biden's staunch support does make the community feel safer, it doesn't take away her conviction that another Holocaust could happen again if hateful trends are left unchecked.
October 7th felt to the Jewish community like a repeat of the Holocaust. When we heard the same stories of mothers hugging their children while they're being burnt alive, and children and teens and kids hiding in cabinets, and decapitation and mutilation and rapes, I call it the atrocities of October 7th and the atrocities of October 8th. Because October 7th happened, and it took a little less than 2 hours for the anti-Zionist, anti-Israel, anti-Semitic organizations to start praising it.
She says that antisemitism is also often an indicator of the presence of deeper problems in a society, and that seeking a scapegoat rarely stops with one group only. Natasha Mozgovaya, VOA News.
And even amid that significant rise in anti-Semitism and pro-Palestinian demonstrations sweeping across college campuses that we just heard about, Israel's response to the October 7th Hamas attack has created deep divisions. But there is goodwill, and lots of it. VOA's Lori London spoke with Daniel Sokach. He's chief executive officer of the New Israel Fund. The organization's Jewish donors have just raised an unprecedented amount of money to feed people in Gaza.
Since the beginning of this war, NIF has felt that we need to respond beyond our normal kind of giving in support in Israel, which is usually to civil rights and social change and pro-democracy organizations. The need was so horrific and horrendous and great in responding to 10/7. The people in the kibbutzim, the Bedouins in the villages, folks in towns near the Gaza border were devastated. And for too long, the government was unable to respond to their needs. And so Israeli civil society, including NIF, switched gears from the democracy protests to tend to people's basic needs. And we raised and sent millions and millions of dollars to help people who were hurt, the families of the hostages, people whose homes were destroyed, and we were very proud to do that. Fast forward to now, and that nightmare, it is metastasized because of the war that followed 10/7 into a humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. And without even looking at the question of how that happened or why that happened or who's to blame, we saw tens of thousands of people being killed and hundreds of thousands homeless, millions homeless, and many people facing famine, what international aid organizations were warning about famine. And so we knew immediately that since our moral north is helping all of the innocent people in the region in trying to pave the way for a better future for Israelis and Palestinians, it was sort of self-evident to us that we had to do our part to contend with the catastrophe unfolding. And so we contacted a number of aid organizations and ultimately decided to send support to the International Rescue Committee and World Central Kitchen. And both of those organizations were wonderful to work with, welcomed the support. And so we put the call out right before Passover. And over the course of the last month, thousands and thousands of people gave around $750,000 from around the world, which is going to those two organizations, which are trying to provide humanitarian relief and food for Gaza.
The situation has divided a lot of folks.
NIF definitely has never worried about doing the popular thing in a given political moment. We try to do the right thing in alignment with our values. And I don't think there's anything political about feeding starving people. And it turns out that many, many American Jews and plenty of other people think that too.
This is an enormous amount of money. Is this the first time that the organization has actually raised money to fund programs outside of Israel?
Yeah, it's the first time in my tenure here and the first time that I know of where anything like this has happened.
This is a little different than a lot of the reports we've heard. that a Jewish organization is working so hard and raising this much money, directing it at Palestinians?
After 10/7, as I said, we raised and sent millions of dollars to suffering Israelis. And similarly, now, as a result of a war that followed on after 10/7, there are millions of people facing horrific conditions, including famine. And it was obvious to us that we also had to respond. Within Israel, our staff is Jewish and Palestinian, citizens of Israel. Our grantees are Jewish and Palestinian Israeli grantees. The Israelis on our board contain both Palestinian citizens and Jewish citizens of Israel. So we feel like a mixed, shared organization there in a different way. And every single Arab member of the board or the staff or the grantee community of NIF was 100% on board with trying to provide aid for suffering Israelis, regardless of what their religion or ethnicity or race was. And similarly, 100%, every single Jewish and Arab staff and board member supported this idea of getting aid into Gaza. It's a human thing. I think at core, we don't believe that this conflict is a conflict between Arabs and Jews or Israelis and Palestinians. It's a conflict between those who believe that violence is a legitimate means of achieving their political ends, and those of us who believe that protecting human life is always going to trump that. And that's the side that we're on.
It's VOA's Laurie London, host of Issues in the News. She spoke with Daniel Sokach, CEO of the New Israel Fund. And finally today, reconstruction efforts are underway in Derna, Libya, following the flooding that killed thousands in September of last year. Reuters' Olivia Zellino has more.
Bulldozers carrying sand drive down the streets of Derna in eastern Libya. Months after September's deadly and devastating floods, the city shows some signs of recovery. Construction workers are helping rebuild the damaged structures and landmarks. But while buildings are going up and roads are being repaired, residents are still shocked by the severity of the loss. Yamna al-Shahibi's son and his family died in the flood. She says it's the worst disaster she's ever seen, having lived in Derna for 70 years. Huge swaths of the city were destroyed after heavy rainfall from Storm Daniel crashed through 2 aging dams. Thousands of people died, with thousands more still missing. According to an international report by the World Bank, United Nations, and European Union, flooding destroyed or damaged more than 18,000 homes and affected about 1.5 million people, or 22% of Libya's population. The report put the cost of recovery and reconstruction at over $1.8 billion.
That's Olivia Zellino of Reuters reporting for us today. And that's going to wrap up today's show. There's more VOA coverage 24 hours a day on our website, voanews.com, and across our social media platforms. On behalf of everyone here at VOA, thanks for listening. Until tomorrow, I'm Steve Karish.
For deeper dives and expert analysis, listen to VOA podcasts. Issues in the News explores the biggest stories every weekend, while International Edition keeps you informed every weekday. Plus, with a 5-minute newscast at the top of every hour, you're always up to date.